In this episode, I tell the harrowing tale of how I misplaced $33,000 and what I'm doing right now to try and get it back. Let's get started.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, it's the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. Negotiating compensation, purchasing your first investment property, helping your family with money, the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. New money brings new problems that require new solutions. Join us as we work through them together. I'm Brenton Harrison, and this is the New Money, New Problems podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the New Money, New Problems podcast. I hope that you are having a better week than I am having because, as I shared in the intro, I recently misplaced $33,709 exactly. And the reason that I want to talk about it is several reasons. Number one, I think that the process for getting it back, and I will get it back, we'll share a lot of information on just, number one, me trying to practice what I preach in terms of preparedness for financial emergencies. It will also touch on relationship dynamics because obviously when you misplace that amount of money, you have to tell your spouse. And it will, try and highlight some areas where when we talk about leverage and some things that you can do in terms of when you need access to funds, here's where you can go. All of those lessons are kind of encapsulated in this one mistake that I made and how I am choosing to recover from it. So let me lay the groundwork for you, or the pretext for the context, as some people would say. I woke up last Friday, April 17th, and I logged in to check my bank account. Now, I try not to do that every single day because it's not the most useful of exercises, but I checked it last Friday morning because it was payday. Not for me, it was payroll day for staff. And when I logged in, I saw a very unfortunate message waiting for me, and that message was that I had overdrawn my account by almost $30,000. And as soon as I saw that amount, I knew exactly what had happened. Let me explain. We've talked about on this podcast over and over again about the importance of paying quarterly taxes as an entrepreneur. And April 15th is not just the day that tax returns are due. It's also the date that if you owed on your taxes from the previous year, you have to make that last payment. And it's the date, if you are paying quarterly taxes for the current year, that you have to make the first quarter payment if you don't want to be assessed underpayment penalties. Now, one thing I can say is I am always on top of my tax planning documents. I keep a running tab of what I'm earning throughout the year. So it's very rarely a surprise when it comes to the amount that I owe, and I get my information into my tax preparer as soon as possible. I want to jump the line. I don't want to be sending in tax documents in late March or early April and all of a sudden they're slammed. So I get my stuff in at the end of January, early February, and I talk to my tax preparer. Again, I believe in proactive tax planning to discuss kind of an estimate of what I think I might owe, some things that I might do to lower that tax bill before April 15th. And I talk about the year ahead so that if there's anything that I need to build into my planning, that I have done so. As an example, for the coming year, we'll talk about this in future episodes, I'm considering converting to an S Corp to lower the payroll taxes that I pay on my income throughout the year. So I'm looking backwards and I'm looking forwards, and that's a process that I followed when it came to my 2025 taxes. After I send in those tax documents, after we have those conversations about some things I can do before April 15th, because I spend a significant amount of my working hours as a financial advisor helping other clients look over their tax returns, I send in my information and then I'm in the weeds in my own work. We do what's called block scheduling at New Money, New Problems, where we meet with every single recurring client that we have in the spring, summer, and fall within the same 8-week period. And one of those 8 weeks is in the middle of tax time so that we can help them if there's anything on their return that we think needs to be amended, corrected before they finalize what they send in. So after I've sent in my information, I am slammed. It's just that type of season, and my planning, which I tried to do before, can kind of get lost in the shuffle. Well, that happened this year more than most years. It was a crazy busy tax season, a crazy busy personal season, and while I had the draft return from my tax preparer, I had not finalized it with him, and I also had not e-signed what he planned to file. So we got all the way to April 13th, and I didn't even realize I hadn't e-signed it. My CPA reached out to me and said, hey, I need a signature from you and your wife, otherwise I can't file this return for you. I log on, I see the documents, I e-sign the documents without even looking at them. Again, in my mind, we've already talked about this draft return. I hadn't done much in the interim. It should be pretty straightforward. But what I did remember for sure is that in the last conversation we had, he told me that I would have to pay $33,709. So that's April 13th. Now, I know that if I don't make that payment by April 15th, then they're going to start assessing me penalties and interest. So the next task in my mind is to go to the IRS database, log into my account, and pay the $33,709. Now, just in case you're ever in a situation, not where you've lost this money, but where you need to make a payment to the IRS and you're wondering how to do so, let's walk through it. If you're looking on screen, I'm going to pull up the irs.gov website. It is surprisingly easy to sign up for an account and navigate how to make payments on this database. You're looking at the home page. You can go on the navigation bar to payments and payment options. And when you pull up the options for making a payment, it's going to ask for whether you want to pay by bank account, whether you want to pay by card, and it will also ask what you're paying for. Are you paying towards a past due balance? Are you paying for an amended return? Are you paying an estimated tax payment, which would be a quarterly tax payment? And when you go through those options, it will let you pick what's relevant to you and make that payment. So I went through this process and I chose to pay by bank account, and I set it up to pay $33,709 by bank debit. So that's April 14th. April 15th hits and I see that money debited from my bank account. So where did the overpayment come from? On Friday, they took the money out again. And while I wish I could say that it was because the IRS just hates me and they were picking on me, what I knew had happened immediately was that I had not paid attention to the full details of the tax return and tax document that my preparer sent me. If you're looking on screen, you're looking at an, of course, de-identified cover page that my CPA includes every year that he files our return. And if you're reading with me, it says, enclosed is your 2025 Form 1040 U.S. Individual Income Tax Return prepared from the information provided. Your return will be e-filed with the IRS once we receive your signed Form 8879 IRS e-file signature authorization. This means that I'm just giving them the authorization to e-file on my behalf. Now, here's the important part. It says an amount of $33,709 will be withdrawn on April 15th, 2026 from your blank checking account ending in blank, blank, blank. What this means is that I had failed to recall that I had given our CPA our account and routing number for our bank account already. And I had also given him permission to set up our payment so that it was automatically withdrawn at the same time the tax return was filed. So when I went in to manually make that payment, I actually set it up to double pay, which is why on Friday the 17th, my account was overdrawn. Now, obviously, there's a lesson here in paying attention to detail. I spent all of my time helping people with their tax returns, and I did most of the process right. But for something as important and an amount as consequential, I was so wrapped up in helping other people and doing other things that I didn't take the 5 minutes that it would have taken to simply go through the return in a little more detail, if not to catch mistakes, which there were none, to at least be able to see that the money was going to come out automatically. And it set up the next step of this journey, which is figuring out how to get it back and where to pull money from while I wait for my refund.
This is the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. We'll be right back.
Are you wondering what new money problems you might be overlooking in your financial life? If so, we've got great news. We've crafted the New Money, New Problems Gap Finder to identify potential weaknesses in your finances. in areas ranging from budgeting, investments, insurance, and even the threat your extended family's finances could pose to your household. Please head to newmoneynewproblems.com/gapfinder to complete it today. Again, that's newmoneynewproblems.com/gapfinder to take the assessment.
You're listening to the New Money, New Problems podcast. Subscribe now at newmoneynewproblems.com. Welcome back.
All right, now that we're back, let's talk about that journey. And we're now going to enter into the relational element of this type of financial process. And the relational element means that the first thing that I had to do was tell my wife. Now, I told my wife out of something that has been a process of us being on better terms financially in terms of how we communicate, not because I thought that she was going to suddenly find out that mistake. I love my wife. I would say that I am quite confident she doesn't even know the password to our bank account. But I will also say that in past years, because I feel like I do this every day, because this is my profession, I would likely have taken some of the next steps without even consulting her, and it may have been something that she found out after the fact and wished that I would have communicated, right? There's already a natural power imbalance when it comes to our conversations about money because I do this as a profession, but that does not mean that it robs me of the responsibility to at least try to be on equal terms in terms of the amount of information that we both know. She says she appreciated the communication, and then I go on my journey. Now, when it comes to that journey, what do? Well, if you are going to try and cancel a payment that you have set up for the IRS, you have to go in and cancel it at least 2 days before the planned payment date. In my case, since April 15th was the due date, I would have had to have gone in and canceled my manual payment by April 13th, and I didn't even make it till the 14th, so that wasn't an option. So I called my CPA to verify, but I knew intuitively that I had to now wait for the tax refund itself, which can take a while. So how do I figure out how long it can take? I go right back to the IRS database. And on the homepage, you'll see in the navigation bar another tab that says records and status. And under that tab, it says refund status. I'm selecting the tax year 2025. And when I select that tax year, it pulls up a tracker to let me know where I stand in terms of not just having that return being received, but also whether my refund was approved and whether it was sent. And under the tracker, it says, we've received your tax return and it is being processed. If you filed a complete and accurate tax return, your refund should be issued within 21 days of the received date. However, processing times can take longer under certain circumstances. No further action is needed from you at this time. So now I know that in a perfect world, and the IRS isn't perfect, I have to find a plan that floats that money, that $33,000, for let's say 21 to 30 days. So I'm going to plan worst case scenario for a few months because I know of clients who have waited that long and sometimes longer for refunds. So the 90-day plan would be kind of my worst case scenario, hopefully. But in reality, I'm hoping a more realistic plan is 30 days where I need to find how to replace that money because remember, my account was overdrawn. It's not like it made me a little lighter. I had to find a way to get back to even in order to move forward financially. Now, here's the next part when it comes to emergency preparedness that gives you a little insight into how I plan and also the fact that when I say, hey, most of the things we're talking about on these podcasts are things that I've actually been through. Something that I have not shared because I didn't have her permission to share is that my wife has actually been out of work for several months. She is someone who has an expertise in product marketing. She was the director of product marketing at her previous role, and her department was laid off in the spring of last year. So when we were doing all those episodes about just the bloodbath in corporate America of people who were losing their roles, specifically minorities, specifically Black women, that was actually something that I'm acutely aware of because we were dealing with it and are dealing with it in my household. Now, when you have someone who loses a job, it tests the preparedness of your finances in a major way because I have told you that I try to layer our emergency reserves so that I have 1 month's worth of expenses in our regular savings account. I have 2 to 5 months worth of expenses in our high yield savings account. The next layer of our emergency reserves is in our non-qualified brokerage account. Now that's 6 months expenses before you get to our brokerage account, and my wife has been out of her job for about 9 months. That's the reason why we're paying so much in health insurance. We don't have the corporate plan that we used to have, although that plan was expensive too. So we went from just not only losing an income to having our health expenses go up to $14.75 a month. Our child's in private school. It's a lot of stuff that you have to pay for in this phase of adulting. So when you look at how to access funds, our emergency reserve, at least the cash portion of it, has been blown through for the most part. Now, thankfully, I have not had to access our brokerage assets, which is something that I kind of saw as the last resort, because if you sell something, now we got to pay taxes. We have less money in the market if the market grows. Again, not the end of the world. It sucks to watch it go, but that's what emergency reserves are for, and this is an emergency. So it's just kind of a fact of life that sometimes you go through periods where you got to tap into something that you didn't want to tap into. Now, what that did mean is that when it came to that $33,000, I couldn't just pull it out of another cash account because I had liquidated those cash accounts. So now we go to the next phase of, do we have to tap into investments? I look at retirement accounts. I look at our brokerage account. And let's talk about the pros and cons of each. If I were to tap into our brokerage account, I would likely be selling investments that I would have to sell at a gain. Now, I've had that investment account for many years, so thankfully it will be a long-term capital gain of 15%, but also we're subject to the net investment income tax. So we would have to pay on top of that 15%, 3.8% because of that capital gain. So you're talking about essentially a 19% tax on whatever we take out of that account, in addition to the fact that now we have less money in the account, period. So you can see why that wasn't something that I was looking forward to, especially when we're really only getting to keep about 80% of what we're withdrawing because of those taxes. The next accounts would be our pre-tax retirement accounts, which in our case would be pre-tax individual retirement accounts. The pre-tax retirement accounts are also a no-go because we're not 59 and a half. So if we were to access money from those retirement accounts, we would have to pay not only tax on the money as if we earned it, we would also have to pay a 10% penalty for a premature distribution. Not an option. The next retirement account was a Roth retirement account. And it's never been a huge part of our personal planning, but we do have small Roth IRAs that we opened before we had a child, sometime in our mid to late 20s. And Roth IRAs are a little bit unique in terms of when you can access the funds. It is true that traditional retirement age for these accounts is still 59 and a half, but what is also true with the Roth IRA is there are scenarios where you can access the contributions that you have made to a Roth retirement account, but not your earnings. And you can do that at any age. You don't have to be 59 and a half. So in my mind, this was a potential option. And I went and looked at our Roth IRAs and I looked at how much we would be able to access, but unfortunately, it wouldn't have been enough to cover the difference. And while I wouldn't have had to pay taxes or penalties, I still, in an ideal world, would want that money to stay in the market in case there was growth. So where did my mind go next? Well, it went to credit cards. Credit cards are something that I try to use pretty strategically. I hate paying interest on credit cards, and at least for me, I have found a system that works fairly well, given the way that my cash flow works. Now, I'm about to tell you something that is not a recommendation. Matter of fact, I would recommend that you do the opposite of what I do, because most people are not going to kind of have the real-time projections that I have in terms of income and pay as much attention to it. So this is definitely a do as I say, not as I do. But part of the reason that I owed so much in tax on the first place is because when my wife lost her job, I stopped paying quarterly taxes. In the last episode, we talked about safe harbor payments, where you try to have a projection of what you're going to make for the current year. And based on whether your pay is going to go up or down, you either decide to pay 110% of what you paid last year, or you choose to pay 90% of what you would owe in the current year. Well, if you have that real-time projection and you're keeping up with our story, I knew when my wife lost her job that in 2025, our household income was going to be significantly lower than it was in 2024. And that meant that based on what we had already paid into the system, there wasn't a very high likelihood that I had to pay an underpayment penalty. We were going to owe less in taxes. And if you're looking on screen, you can actually see that this ended up being true. My wife lost her job shortly after the end of quarter one of 2025. I chose to not make quarterly payments in quarters 2, 3, and 4 of 2025. And if you look on our tax return, again, de-identified, you can see on this line item that I've highlighted that we did not get assessed an underpayment penalty. So those funds that I was setting aside every single paycheck, every time I get paid, I take 25% and I put it aside in a separate account for taxes. I just kept that money in a high yield savings account and let it earn a higher rate of return, with the thought being, hey, I can use this money if I need it for operating capital throughout the year. I can replenish what I had to take out. And because we're earning less money, if we don't get charged an underpayment penalty, I'll have gotten the benefit of that rate of return on the high yield savings throughout the year, and it won't have cost me. Again, it was a well-informed risk, but not one that I would encourage you to take. The other part of managing cash flow during that period is a significant portion of my income is paid in quarterly increments. So on a yearly basis, probably 85% of my pay is paid to me in January, April, July, and October. Now, the problem with that is if I have the same expenses every single month, but I'm not really getting paid very much in those interim months, there can be periods where I have to put some of my expenses on a credit card without the money coming in that month to pay it off. I have to wait until the next quarter. Now, the way that I've managed that without having to pay credit card interest is I found a credit card, and it happens to be the Capital One Saver One card, that on regular intervals will give offers where you can take balances from other credit cards and transfer it to that Capital One card at 0% interest. If you're looking on screen, I actually have the current offer from Capital One up for you to see. It says transfer a balance to your credit card at 0% APR for 9 months with a 4% transfer fee. After that, you will be charged the APR for purchases, currently 23.49% variable. So this is something that I have done occasionally if I'm in a similar period where I'm trying to stabilize cash flow, or when I'm in the middle of a quarter and I'm waiting 2 months for the big payment to come, and there's something that I need to pay for, but I don't want to pull money out of savings to do so. I might take advantage of an offer like this to transfer balance onto this card so that it's not costing me additional interest. And then at the end of the quarter, when I receive my payment fees from my clients, I'll use it to pay off that card and make sure it's at a zero balance. Now, in this case, I've had to do it more frequently, right? There's one less income in the household. So there's already a balance on that card, but because I get paid in April, literally it should be cleared off within the next week or two. But until that happens, there's not much that I can do in terms of a cash advance or something with other credit cards, because that strategy has already been spoken for. I've now realized and accepted that it's going to cost me something. I'm either going to have to pay taxes or I'm going to have to pay interest, but I've kind of exhausted all the resources where I can just pull money from here, have no extra pain, and move forward. Now I know that there's something I'm going to have to pay, and I'm just trying to minimize what that cost will be. The first place I looked was permanent life insurance. I have promised you that we're going to have a conversation about permanent life insurance at some point on this show in more detail. But conceptually, when you have permanent life insurance, and not only is it permanent, but for most policies, there's a cash value component. Meaning that all of the money that you pay each month doesn't just go towards the cost of you potentially dying. There's a portion of your payment that goes into an account called your cash value account or your policy value account. And depending on the type of coverage you have, there's going to be a different structure for how money is credited or interest is credited to that cash value. With a whole life policy, there's going to be a set rate of return. With an index universal life policy, it's going to track some index or indices and give you a crediting rate based on the details of that policy. And my wife actually happens to have an index universal life policy. I, however, have a variable universal life policy. A variable universal life policy, the money that hits the cash value, is invested in something called sub-accounts, which are kind of akin to a mutual fund. And as that policy value grows, there's many ways that you can access it. One of those ways is a flat out withdrawal. So if you had $50,000 in policy value and you took a $33,709 withdrawal, then your actual policy value balance would decrease by that amount. You're taking money out in the same way that you would an investment. Now, the positive is, similar to a Roth IRA, if you follow certain parameters, when you take a withdrawal from that cash value, it is not taxable. So if I were to choose that option, I at least know that I wouldn't have to pay any taxes, but again, I would have less money in the market. You also, with permanent life insurance, can take a policy loan against your cash value. It's called a collateralized loan. In this scenario, if I have $50,000 in cash value and I take a $33,000 loan against it, I still have $50,000 in cash value. So you're probably wondering, well, what happens if you don't pay it back? Well, you can choose to pay it back, but if you don't pay it back and you happen to die, what the life insurance company does is they subtract the loan that you owed them from the death benefit that your family receives. Put more simply, if I had a $500,000 policy and I died with a $20,000 loan against my policy value, instead of $500,000, my family would get $480,000. Now, to me, this is still a pretty good option because the loan interest rates when you take these collateralized loans are really low, 2 to 3% in the scenario for my policy. However, not that I'm planning, knock on wood, to die sometime between when I get my tax refund, I don't like the idea that if I were to walk out and get hit by a bus, that my family would get $30,000 less than they had planned in death benefit. So while this was a very viable option, when you add in the fact that it is a little more clunky to get a policy loan than some of the other options that I'm going to mention, it was just something that I thought is a great option, but not one that I plan to choose. There's also a portfolio line of credit or securities-backed line of credit where you're using that same concept of a collateralized loan, but now you're using it with an investment account instead of either a policy value or a home like you would in a home equity line of credit. Now, this was an option that I considered because, again, I can avoid the taxes, I can avoid the penalties, and I looked into this with our current custodian. We happen to have our investment account at Fidelity, so I looked up the details for Fidelity's securities-backed line of credit. Now, most custodians, when you have non-retirement accounts, they will give you this type of option that you can look into, and many of them will grant that type of option to open a securities-backed line of credit when you have as little as $25,000 or $30,000 in your account. But when I looked at Fidelity's guidelines, I'm looking and I'm saying, man, they have competitive rates. They have easy access. You can stay invested. You can watch a recording of their webinar. They make it easy. They'll connect you with a Fidelity representative. You can pledge your investment account as collateral. But then I saw eligibility. Typically, clients pledge a minimum of $500,000 in assets as collateral. And while there are people out there who are less fortunate than I can share that I do not have $500,000 to pledge as collateral for this line of credit. So now this is not even an option because unless I were to move those funds elsewhere, which I don't plan to do, I just don't meet the minimums to have a securities-backed line of credit at Fidelity. So where did I land? Where was the final place that we went? It's simple, but I wanted to go through the steps of my thought process so you could see it. But I went to our home equity line of credit. And to be clear, I very much understand that not everybody listening to this will have access to these tools. And to be fair, it took me over 15 years of saving and investing to have enough access to these tools for them to be a possibility. But if there are any of them, or if you find yourself in a similar situation, I want you to understand the thought process of how you use leverage, collateral, and the like. And for us, we are fortunate enough to live in a home that has equity and have access to a home equity line of credit. Now, I have said on the past that if you have a home that has equity, even if you don't have any plans to use a home equity line of credit, I would rather you have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And boy, is this an example of having it and needing it. And if we didn't have a home equity line of credit in place, it would have probably taken me 4 to 6 weeks to contact a lender, have them come and do an appraisal of the home, send in our financial information, get it approved. And by that time, the tax refund would hopefully already be here. But thankfully, even though we haven't had a need recently for our home equity line of credit, we already had one in place. And we had access to enough on that home equity line of credit to be able to use this as a tool and pull out that $33,709. And that home equity line of credit is already connected to our checking account. So not only could I access the funds, I could access the funds immediately with a simple transfer from one account to the other. When I looked at the details of the home equity line of credit in terms of the interest rate, which is variable, it's currently at 6.75%. Higher than what I could have found with other options, but more ease of access, which is valuable to me at this time because of the urgency. 6.75% on what we were borrowing would mean that on a monthly basis, it would cost us about $188 worth of interest. So let's say that in my worst case scenario, it does take the 90 days that I was expecting. You're talking about essentially a penalty that I have to pay because of my error of a little less than $600. Is it the best thing in the world? Of course not. But is it as punitive as you might expect when you wake up on a Friday morning and saw that your account was over withdrawn by almost $30,000? I would say, of course not as well. So this was the journey through how and why I lost the $33,000, how I communicated it to my spouse, and thankfully she was gracious and accommodating, and also the thought process for how to plug that hole while I wait to get that money back. I pray to God you don't ever find yourself in a similar situation and that you use this as a lesson from the person who's supposed to be helping you avoid these things, that financial advisors are not perfect as well, but there are some things where if we've done at least part of what we've preached, we have the ability to recover in a way that you can use in your financial life as well if you follow similar steps. See you next week.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, this was the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen.